Hello music techie people. We're going to look at compression today and just the basic parameters that you would find on a compression unit and how to use these and when to use these. So, compression is basically controlling your dynamic range, and what you're doing is controlling the peak transits, the really strong parts of the signal, and allowing those to become more uniformed with the lower parts. So what you get is a more punchier and rounded signal altogether. So I've got a bass guitar track here that I'll play for you. Okay, so bass is a real typical instrument that you would often use compression on. Now, as you can hear there, the sound's not uniformed all the way throughout. There's parts where the bass player has hit some notes slightly louder than others, and there are sections where it does sort of jump. Now, through compression, we can round the whole signal off, okay, and make the whole thing a lot more punchier and a lot more uniform and flatter, so it stands out and is more rounded. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to first go to my inserts, which is over here on the left. I've selected the track, and that's why it's lighter grey here. And I'm just going to click down and go to dynamics. Now, compression is a dynamic effect. It's controlling the dynamics of the sound. Okay, and just click that, and it opens up here. I'll make this a little bit bigger so you can see what's happening. There we go. Now, the three main controls on a compressor are firstly the threshold. That sets the limit to where you want the compressor to work. Okay. Next is the ratio. That's for how much you want the compressor to work. So from, if it's 2:1, for every 2 that comes in, only 1 goes out. And the final one is the gain. Once the compressor's finished rounding off the signal, how much of the uniform signal do you want to send out to the audio, to the speakers? Okay, so let's just have a look. I'm going to press play, and we'll go through some of the basic parameters on compression. Okay. So the first thing I want to do now is set the threshold. I want the compressor to only act on the peaks where it goes above the rest of the uniform sound. So I do that with the threshold, and I slowly bring it down till I start to see my signal entering this bar here, shown in dBs, and that's the gain reduction. So we do that first. Okay, so at about -24 there. Normally for bass guitars you would have, it'll be something around -20, -24, where you start to get the higher transients. The next thing is I'm going to set the ratio, and that's how much it's going to work on those really high signals. So if it's over by 4, it will only let 1 out. Okay, so let's listen to that. So there's the 4:1. This is pretty much a good starting point for bass guitar, about 4:1. You might want to go for some more serious compression as you go up to maybe 6, 8, maybe even 10. Okay, so now I'm going to keep it about 5. That sounded quite nice. So what I'm then going to do is set the gain output. How much the whole signal is then sent back to the overall mix. And you can hear now that it's a lot punchier. The louder parts don't sort of jump out as much. The whole thing has increased, and what you've got is a far smoother mix. What we've also got on the compressor is a series of controls. Now, a good way to think of the compressor is someone that is, his whole job is to sit on the fader, on the level fader, and every time the sound goes above a certain threshold, he brings the fader down. But what that person can't do, which a compressor can, is we can set certain parameters so that it only listens for when it jumps over that threshold and to how quickly it reacts. Now, the attack is once the signal's gone past the threshold, it's how quickly the compression reacts. Now, with things like bass guitars and drums, you want a quick attack. That means that once it's gone over the threshold, it starts to work straight away. Now, with things with strings, you may want it to be a lot more sort of forgiving and take a longer time for the compression to start to work and to reduce it using the ratio. The next thing is the release. Once the sound drops below the threshold, when do you want the compression to stop and not do anything else to the signal and just let it get on with what it's doing? Now, you can hear on the bass guitar that once the sound and the note has been played, it pretty much dies out. That means that its decay, that its release, they fade out quite quickly. So I can set this to the same. Okay? And then the final main thing is the knee, and that's how hard the compressor shapes the sound. If you look here, going along the bottom is the input of the sound, and going along the left hand side is the output. So we've got quite a strong signal coming in, and then it's cut in regards to the ratio and the threshold that it's set. Now, for a strong knee, you bring it over to the left and you can see that it's a lot sharper, and that makes it a lot obvious that it's been compressed. It's a lot more noticeable. If we use a softer knee, it's a lot more rounded. Now, a soft knee is really, really good for making it a lot less obvious going between uncompressed signals and compressed signals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it quite sharp. It's quite a punchy sounding bass guitar, and we want it to have that sort of punch behind it. You've also got on a compressor this area here called the peak and the RMS. Now the RMS stands for root mean square, and that's just taking an average, okay, of the whole signal, and it looks ahead and it sort of works out when to compress. Whereas the peak is really, really good for more short, snappy, brief transits like drums, and that's really good when you're mixing individual drum hits. Okay, so I would keep it on just on RMS here. So let's have a quick listen and see if we can get that nice punchy bass sound. Okay, there's it compressed. We're peaking a little bit there. And you can hear the difference there. When I turn the ratio down, there's sudden jumps in the sound, and then when it's brought back up, it's a lot smoother, people. So we're in the studio, and I'm going to show you how to compress, this time with an analog compressor. So I've got a bass track loaded up on Logic, just a loop of about 8 bars, so I'll play that. But what I want to do, instead of using a plugin on Logic, I want to use this compressor here, okay? And what I've done is, through my patch bay, I've come out of Logic, gone into the input, which is here, out of the compressor and back into Logic. So I have a separate track which I will record enable, okay, and then send the output of the original bass sound to that track. And what I should see now is the signal start to come through on the compressor. If you look here, let's just press play. There we go. And we can't hear it yet because we need to bring in this gain reduction. Okay, and what we should start to hear it as we bring that in now. Okay, so I'm going to set the threshold. That's the point where I want it to start compressing. This is, all the controls are exactly the same as on the Logic compressor. Then I've got the ratio, which is how much of the compressor I want it to do. So I've got about 4:1. So for every 4 dB over the threshold, it's going to reduce it. Okay. Then I'm going to set the attack and the release to quite quick, so it gets those beginning transients, the quite quick sounds on the bass. And then set the final gain, so we get a nice strong signal. And what the compressor's doing there is bringing down the harder transients, but also bringing up the lower ones. So we're getting a nice uniform sound, where each peak in the signal is a lot more uniform and a lot more smoother, and you get a much punchier sound. Okay? And you can hear there that the bass is a lot smoother now. It's a lot more uniform. There's not as many transients, and it's just nice and smooth, and that'll sit really well in our mix.